Hi guys, Paul here. Hope you're all keeping well. Welcome back to the Anfield View. Today we're going to talk all things signings, all things this summer, and really ask or pose the question: is signings enough this summer? So let's just say slots stay in, and the club's position is where it is. Is signings going to move the needle? Going to make that much difference to the club for next year? And look, there's there. We could always sit here and say, how do we know at this point in time? Because we don't know how many and who and how much we're going to spend. Let's dial it back a tiny bit and then really revisit a little bit to last year and say, what, less than 200 million net spend. You're looking at obviously money going out to agents, fees, etc., as well, and obviously expenses that we don't really see at this sort of juncture before accounts come out sort of further down the line. But really sort of dial it back and really look at the expenditure of last year. Look, fundamentally, we a lot of high earners came off the books, and whilst it was a big net spend and sort of in sort of some people's words, it was the equivalent of us almost spending 3 summers worth of spends or expenditure, pardon me, in one hit rather than just a larger than normal sort of Liverpool summer. I mean, I would say, look, Liverpool fundamentally would have a net spend of around 50 to 60 million net spend per summer. So yes, in many ways that's right, but then equally, I would argue that a 50 to 60 million net spend for a club the size of Liverpool, the turnover of Liverpool, is very well. It's not the fact that it's very low. It's almost next to near the bottom of the Premier League in terms of net spend. So it's hard to really. It's hard for anybody. It doesn't matter what business case that you want to put forward. It's hard for anybody to say a club the size of Liverpool to have a net spend of 50 to 60 million a year each summer is really is it. I would say is really overly ambitious in terms of really chasing success. And whilst the business model of the club, from a commercial perspective, is genius, and what they've been able to put in terms of expertise has been genius, and they produce the results, and you can't argue with that. You can argue that success on the pitch breeds success off the pitch, and failure on the pitch also filters through and equals failure off the pitch. When it comes to sport, they're equally aligned. You will always see, if you're not doing very well, you're going to see a drop off. Not crazy drop off. You don't have to look at Man United. They've been pretty abject for the last 10 years, and you haven't really seen that big a drop off in terms of their turnover, really. Can if you relate their overall sort of sporting achievements of the last 10 compared to their sort of drop off in turnover, you would say that they've actually done really, really well to keep the turnover where it's at, considering just how poor they've been. And so you wouldn't think an off season here and there would really move the needle that much, for Liverpool. So what I want to do is really look at last year's net spend and say, look, in the eyes of the club, they would dress it up as 3 summers net spend in one hit. I would argue that the net spends of spending 50 to 6 million net each summer is pretty unambitious, and one of the reasons why we've never really been dominant. We've been amazing, but we're almost punching above what we were investing because of the genius of Klopp, the genius of our scouting that we had, and the ability to sort of coach up sort of diamonds to be superstars. The question remains now, then, moving forward, is everything that sort of filters out into the world when it comes to football at the moment is that Liverpool really don't have any ambition to really have a summer as large as last summer in terms of net spend. And I'm not saying ultimately that a 200 million net. The problem that I have is I'm not convinced even a 200 million net spend this summer is necessarily going to be enough to really solve all the problems that we have. And so that poses an even bigger question that comes behind that. If somebody gave us 200 million net spend now and we brought in 3 to 4 key players, bear in mind we're probably going to sell 2 or 3 players on top. So you end up spending, let's just say Liverpool spent 300 million this summer, but only 180 million of that is net spend. One, is the club going to underwrite 100 million, 180 million net spend? Sure, we see other clubs do back to back to back, 3, 4 summers in a row of that sort of spend. Liverpool, for their own reasons and for their own business model, don't want to do that. The problem is they don't really have in one hand, they're either going to have the scouting summer from heaven in terms of, look, if you want to have a net spend underneath 100 million this summer and be able to rewrite the wrongs of where the squad is at now, then you're going to have to find some gems like Brighton and Bournemouth, from here, there, and everywhere for like 15, 20 million. Because the bottom line is there's players that are leaving that need to be replaced, and then the squad's already threadbare as it is. And so even with the spin of promoting youth, well, look, Traniani and Rio have been there all year, and so ultimately next year you're going to have to put a head. You can't sit here next year and moan that you don't have the players, but then don't want to play Rio or Traniani next year, if that makes sense. Is you either you do or you don't. You can't sort of use one argument to support both positions. My viewpoint from where Liverpool is at now is that I'm not entirely convinced that even with £180 million net spend this summer, it's going to solve all of the problems. It's going to need a different strategy in terms of our tactics, a different strategy in terms of our training, a different strategy in terms of our mindset, a different strategy in terms of our fitness, and great scouting, the right buys, the right players that are athletes, fit, strong, fast, and have the edge. And what I mean by the edge, players like Sadio Mane, the ones that have real grit, determination to really succeed. Your Genie Wijnaldum's, I'm not saying the exact same. Look, we'd love it, Sadio Mane right now, but I'm just saying, like, we need to have players that have really got that mindset to really drive the club forward. But equally, they have to have the attributes, the athletic attributes, as well as the skill. And I would argue at this point in time, Liverpool needs a slight push more towards athletes with a tiny bit less skill and less, because I feel like last time it was all about the skill and not so much the athletes. And that's why we're a soft touch to play, as in our midfield is pretty. It's pretty easy to bypass. Let's be honest. We don't really frighten any teams for pace or speed or power. Without a doubt, we've got a great striker in Ekateke and Isak, and we also have a great player in Soboslai in terms of his shooting and verts. When at his best, is a phenomenally talented player. So we do still have phenomenally talented players, but equally, we've got too many massive gaping chasms in the team that really need to be filled. Can it be done with one transfer window this summer? I don't know. As I explained before, I think there's a lot of other factors that have to also work. So let's just say we have let's just say whatever we do this summer and whatever we spend this summer, 75% of that has to work. It has to be the right buy. It has to be the right buys, the right players, and the right positions. Winger, defensive midfielder, a winger and a defensive midfielder are absolutely essential, and that's because if we end up just buying a technical midfielder again, then we still haven't solved the problem of nobody protecting the defence. If we don't buy a midfielder that's an athlete, then once again, the midfield's easy to bypass and ponderous and can get overrun and overworked. If we don't solve this situation with our training methods or tactical philosophy or overall approach to trying to have, or overall approach that we have to try and put us in a position to win a game, both from a training, from a philosophy, from a tactical approach, we don't change all of those elements, then we aren't going to win or be very successful next year. We'll just be in exactly the same boat. Okay, we may be a little bit better. We won't have, but we're on what, 17, 18 losses now? Sure, we may only have 12 losses next year or 11 losses next year with the right buys this summer, but equally, we're not going to turn it round to a title challenge with just one element working right. So I really wanted to sort of run through that with you guys because I feel that for a long part of this season, I thought, okay, a couple of wingers, defensive midfielder, maybe another centre back, right as rain, we're good to go next year. Now I'm very much of the view that, okay, it's very apparent that this isn't just we're missing key cogs in the wheel. Granted, I get it. Salah's dropped off a cliff in terms of form. We're in a position where McAllister's dropped off a cliff in terms of his form. Gravenberch has dropped off a cliff in terms of his form. You could argue Canate's dropped off a cliff in terms of his form. Okay, but then a couple of those players are still going to be here next year, probably. We're looking in a position where we're probably going to give Kanate a new contract. That means he's going to be a mainstay of the team for the vast majority of next year. Gravenberch has just been given a hefty new contract for 6 years. So that means we're going to be having a scenario where we've got Soblazai, who's been our best performer this year, and Gravenberch, who's now been given a new contract. So how are we going to actually move this, sort of further forward and really improve upon the position where we're at now? When we know full well the club isn't going to spend an obscene amount of money, it may have the viewpoint that it doesn't want to match anywhere near what it did last summer. Yet you could make a very good argument, if not a better argument, that the club needs to do more now this summer than what it did last summer. Sounds utterly nuts, doesn't it? Last summer, when you come off a title win, frankly, we were all, let's be honest, if all Liverpool fans were honest, we would sit here and say, frankly, we're looking at Bradley probably taking over from Trent. We weren't thinking about Diaz going anywhere. We were predominantly just thinking about Darwin Núñez going out and another striker coming in. And that was really it. And maybe another centre-back, because we always felt we were a centre-back short. So if you asked the Liverpool supporter last year before any business was done, you would say a backup right back to support Bradley, because Bradley was really meant to be the one that was taken over from Trent. You were looking at a centre-back because we were a centre-back short. And you were looking for somebody to really replace Núñez. I get the tragedy of Jota puts the urgency in terms of buying an extra, striker, sadly, on that. I get it. 100% get it. And so, sure, you can make the argument to say, Isak and Ekateke come in. Obviously, we know about the sad tragedy of Jota and the situation regarding Núñez. And so, okay, you could understand that. And a backup right back would have been fine, and we needed a centre back. You could make the case, say, well, in their view, Leone was the centre back. The very fact we went after Gay says Leone probably wasn't meant to be. I don't know whether Leone was the urgent priority, but he was done before Gay. So was it? I mean, he's very highly rated. So I generally don't know. Was Leone the top priority over getting Gay? It very very much feels that. It feels that way, doesn't it? Because in all honesty, if you've gone after him first and not gone after Gahey, then it feels that you prioritise it. I don't know whether they felt that they were always going to get Mark Gahey and it was just a matter of time, and so they just left it to whenever it suited them, or they had to do Leone at that point, otherwise they weren't going to get him. And I'm not entirely sure the timelines on how it's worked out, but the optics look like we either had to get Leone, then we wouldn't have got him, or we were convinced that Mark Gay was always going to happen. But equally, it didn't happen. So they are, by the very fact we went after Mark Gay at the end, recognises the fact that we did have that need. So looking ahead to this year, without a doubt, signings are going to be helpful. We've got massive gaps. Huge need for a defensive midfielder. Huge need for pacey wingers. Because, look, we've barely given Rio minutes this year, so we're not going to give him 70% of the minutes next year. So we've got to be realistic on that. And we've got to have an extra winger to replace Mo as well. And so whether we get one or whether we get two, whether we get one winger or two wingers, equally we still need to get minimum one. We badly need a defensive midfielder. I'm petrified that we're going to get a technical midfielder. I know there's a middle ground where you can get somebody that I wouldn't class Declan Rice as a defensive midfielder, but where we get somebody who could do a bit of both. But then the question is, who is that? I mean, I know I'm okay with Adam Morton. I don't necessarily think he's the second coming of Casado, who obviously would be the ideal person. I know we can't get him because he's Chelsea, but he would be the ideal person that I would want in our midfield, frankly. But I think really look with a view to looking ahead to the summer, it's tricky to see how signings alone can move us that much forward. I think it will solve some of the massive gaping chasms, but I do think that it has to be coupled with a change in strategy in terms of mindset towards mindset and philosophy for fitness, as I said before, fitness, tactics, style, mentality to games, actually starting games far more aggressive, far more in the front foot, and less of this passive technical style that frankly all it's achieving is inviting pressure onto us. And essentially we're starting on the back foot all the time, whether at home or whether away. We're just inviting the pressure onto us, going 1 or 2 nil down, and then ask us to respond all the time. The idea when you've got the players that you have with Liverpool, the onus is on Liverpool to really take control of the game, to really dictate the game, and to put the pressure on the opposition. So even if you don't create phenomenal chances through the skill of your players, the pressure alone ends up making a lot of teams make mistakes and you end up scoring goals. You won't always score goals just because you do a curler into the top corner from 25 yards out. It's not the way football works. God, we wish it was that case. As a fan, we wish it was raining from the heavens in terms of 25-yard curlers. But the reality is you get them maybe once every 4 games. Most of the time, you tend to get a lot of your goals because of the pressure that's exerted from the tactics that you put in place when you're playing the game. And the onus is on the top teams, the teams that spend the most, teams that invest the most, to really take control of games. And I do feel that with Liverpool, they really don't take control of games. And somebody could push back to me and say, well, the idea is that we control the possession of the games and we control we're trying to dictate it from a more subtle tactical perspective. I would argue, well, how is that fair enough? At no point do we ever truly look like we're in control. Within 2 seconds, any team can break on us and score because we've got so many gaping gaps. I don't think we've got the players that are technically good enough to play that style of football. We don't have a Luka Modric in midfield or an Alonso in midfield. Gravenberch isn't. I think sometimes we need to remember the pieces of the chessboard that we're playing with. Szoboszlai isn't that type of midfielder. We got a really weird. I'm going to put a video up for you guys in terms of Ryan Gravenberch. Really, we got a really weird combination of a midfield where none of the three are a defensive midfielder. Alexis McAllister is more of an attacking midfielder. He's not really a sprayer of passes. He's not overtly creative, but he can bring the ball forward to some extent and was very, very good at scoring goals. Gravenberch wants to also do that, really. He wants to get the ball on the half-turn and then move forward. Likes to take a long-range shot. I wouldn't say he creates that much. I'd say he can score some good goals and he really can bring the ball forward. But then my argument would be, but then that's what Szoboszlai does. So hold on, you've got Szoboszlai who wants to get the ball and drive forward. You've got Gravenberch who really wants to get the ball in the half-turn and drive forward. And then you've got Alexis McAllister, who, frankly, his best work is done, in the opposition's half and further forward. So nobody really has the attributes of a defensive midfielder or really an all-round midfielder, I would argue. You've just got very different variations of an attacking midfielder. I know some would say, yeah, Ryan Gravenberch is not really an all-round midfielder. He's not known for his passing, let's be honest, nor is Soboslai. And McAllister to a more extent, but neither of those two are really renowned for their passing. Soboslai is renowned for his driving forward and his pace and his shooting. Gravenberch is known as more of a technical way in which he tends to spin and drive forward really with the ball. And McAllister is really somebody that is a little bit more creative, but not necessarily in terms of spraying passes here and there. More intricate play around the box, 1-2s, and he's good for popping up for goals. And so I just see fundamental flaws in the Liverpool team that you're going to have to cover with new players or a new philosophy, a new style, a new approach, or really the combination of both. I think ultimately for us to be looking ahead towards like a title challenge, which is ultimately the whole point, for us to be really looking ahead towards a title challenge, you really have to be looking towards the combination of the philosophy, the style, the approach. We have to have a complete change of heart when it comes to the fitness. This idea that we train less to perform better on weekends. So we have lower intensity during the week. So we have high intensity on the weekend. So we have less injuries, which means we can play the same 14, 15 players all year round because that suits the manager's philosophy and the small squad and all these different elements. It's like, well, that's just completely not working, is it? I just think it worked for one season purely for the fact that you had players coming down from a ridiculous level of fitness that was ingrained in them for the years with Klopp. You've just seen a gradual decline, pretty much from last February onwards to where we're at now in terms of the fitness is not there. A lot of the personnel that had the mindset is coming and going or wanting to leave. You've then got more technical players that don't necessarily also carry those attributes on, as the cherry on top of the cake, on that front. And that sort of equals where we're at the moment. So, I mean, it'd be great to hear your thoughts, guys. It's not all doom and gloom. And bear in mind, the position where I come from is I come from a position of challenge for titles. Liverpool is all about winning titles. It's who we historically are, it's what our standards are, and it's what they will always be. So always bear in mind that when I put these views across, it comes from a position of the bare minimum for me when it comes to Liverpool is challenging for titles. It's not about the bare minimum for me, it's Liverpool scraping into the top five. That's just my overall viewpoint. And people go, oh, you need to manage your expectations. I don't manage my expectations. The standards of the club remain the standards of the club and they don't change. And it is worrying when you hear sort of key players, including people like Salah, come out and say, he's worried about the standards of the club, essentially saying that people aren't putting in a shift as they need to. They aren't carrying the right mindset that they need to really become the world-class stars. Are they just settling for where they're at? Are they just happy be picking up a big paycheck and doing the flicks and the tricks, but aren't really prepared to put in, the hard yards that are required to really not just win trophies for Liverpool, but get the best out of their career. Let's look at these players, for example, Mane, Robertson, Wijnaldum, Henderson, Milner, Salah as well. You look at all of those players, Bobby Firmino as well. You look at all of those players and say, they maxed out their talent, absolutely maxed out. They worked like crazy to really get the utmost out of them. Sure, players like Gini Wijnaldum sacrificed his creative scoring ability, which we all knew he had. We'd see him go away and do it for Holland. He's playing in a completely different position for Holland as he did for Newcastle. So when people used to, why doesn't he score 20 for Liverpool? He's not asked to do the same things for Liverpool. That's we saw that in the Champions League semi-final. If he wanted to, he could. He just wasn't asked to do that. He was doing a different job for the team. The situation that we've got with Liverpool now is that, like, question marks on Gravenberch last year. Gravenberch, because he wasn't established in the team, we gave him a different role within the team, as a lot deeper role. Was by no means a defensive midfielder in terms of how he plays, but he was positioned in that way for the team. This year, he's playing a slightly more advanced role, and he's not doing the job that we need him to do for the team which he was doing a lot better last year. But he's not, after the first 6 games this year, he's not really doing that well in terms of the further advanced position either. So it's more questions than answers, isn't it, really, guys? It'd be great to hear what your thoughts are. Feel free to like, subscribe, all of that YouTube fun in terms of really just, frankly, if nothing else, just being updated with a new video, just being really uploaded for you guys to sort of watch on that front. We all want signings. It's the easiest way to solve the problems in a football supporters world. And I get that. For a long part of this season, I had sort of 3 or 4 signings in my mind, thinking that will solve all. But equally, I have come around to the train of thought that it's a lot deeper than just those signings. But equally, it's going to be, the bottom line is, just because I say it's deeper than just those signings, it doesn't mean you don't still need those signings. We need those signings and the manager to change the philosophy, and the manager to change mindset, and there needs to be more just sort of realism as to how you need to play in the Premier League and what's required to achieve success in the Premier League. It doesn't mean whoever the manager is, they have to sacrifice all of their principles or how they want to play completely. And you have to play to the strengths of the players that you got in the squad. I get this, but you do have to also find a middle ground. It's all well and good wanting to achieve success the way you want to achieve it. But ultimately, if the way you want to achieve it isn't generating the results, then ultimately you have to have the awareness to step back and say, okay, how I want to achieve it is either one, the actual strategy isn't right to achieve the success, or I'm not executing it right. It can only be one of two things. The strategy, tactics, philosophy, approach isn't right, or my execution of that isn't right. And that applies to business as well. If I'm doing a marketing strategy for a client, then ultimately either the strategy is right or it's wrong, or my execution of the strategy is right or it's wrong. I mean, you do get you on a rare occasion the strategy could be right, and when ultimately, look at it this way: in a weird way, if the strategy is right, then your execution is right. It's very rare because you've put the strategy in place, if that makes sense. So if your execution is wrong, it's very rare that the strategy will still be right. Does that make sense? Because you're the one implementing it. So it's hard for you for your execution to be wrong, but the strategy to be right. And that's my situation with where Liverpool are at the moment, is that whilst there is a lot of mitigating factors, my biggest issue with this season, I've just not seen any improvement from day one, from the start of the season to the end of the season. There's no improvement. I've not seen any real vision or roadmap as to really the direction of travel or what next year really looks like. We've got marquee superstar players in terms of Isak and Verts. And I know Isak hasn't been available for the majority of the season. I get all that, but I'm just saying I just don't see at the moment where it's all going. If I could see elements and say, oh, well, that one player will take us to this, or these two players will take us to this, I have no doubts with Isak, playing the majority of the time, and defensive midfielder and a winger. If we were able to get those other positions, sure, we would be much better. Without a doubt, we couldn't really. Let's be honest, we're starting from a low base. I don't think Liverpool can be any worse than what we are this year. We've had next to no output from Gakpo, next to no output from Mo all season. Ekateke's, whilst scored goals, hasn't scored ridiculous amounts of goals. Isak's not been available for the vast majority of the season, so we've had next to no goals from him. McAllister might as well have not been there this season. Pretty much nothing from him. Gravenberch hasn't been there since about week 6 of this season. Canate's been at maybe 6 games of the season he's played brilliantly, and the rest of them pretty average. It took Kirkers until really January to really get to find his straps as well. We've not seen a right back all season. And so, in one hand, you can sit here and say, There's no way all of this is going to be as equally as bad next year. But the problem is that if you're gonna carry the same approach as this year, training, mindsets, tactics, philosophy, then how is it going to change? You're asking the three new players to come. Are the three new players going to change all of those other elements? Sure, it will definitely plug some holes and we will be better. I'm not saying we won't be better. I'm just saying to expect it to be 20 points better next season or 25 points better purely because of those two or three new additions. I think it's a big ask. I think it needs a lot of other elements to really complement that as well. Great to hear your thoughts, guys. You enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.